Good afternoon, everyone. I think we'll probably have some people streaming in over the next few minutes as folks get out of class and manage to grab lunch. But we will go ahead and get started. So thank you all so much for joining us today for What It Means to Be Latinx in the US, a conversation with Estela López and Noel Casiano. My name is Lisa Cote, and I am the Assistant Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion in the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Community Engagement here at the University of Hartford. And I am very excited to have our two guest speakers here today. So I am not going to take up too much time. I do quickly want to go over how we will be handling questions throughout the program. So for in-person attendees, you can raise your hand and then shout out your question and we'll repeat it into the microphone. For our virtual attendees, you can please submit your questions through the Q&A function on your Zoom toolbar. We have it circled here at the bottom of the screen on this slide to show you what that looks like. I will do my best to also monitor for questions in the chat, but the chat should primarily be used for if you're having technical issues or sharing praise with our lovely speakers. As I mentioned, I'm from the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Community Engagement, and our office works really hard to bring speakers to campus or find on-campus speakers who can help our campus community understand different perspectives and experiences, as well as help engage our campus community members and inform us to transform our campus community into a more welcoming and inclusive space. So without further ado, I will take this slide down and put it back up in just a second. I'm going to have our panelists introduce themselves. We're talking about identity, so it's really important to me that everything is right. So I will have Estela start, and then you can turn it over to Noel.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Buenas tardes, and thank you so much to Lisa and the University of Hartford for inviting me to be part of this dialogue with my colleague, Noel Casiano. When people ask me, Estela, where are you from? I feel the need to tell them a story. I cannot say I am just from one place. I have to say I was born in Cuba, and then my family moved to New York, where I went to school, high school, college, did my master's and my doctoral studies. Then I decided to go to Puerto Rico, where I married a Puerto Rican, have a daughter who is Puerto Rican, and started my professional career. And Puerto Rico is my second home. It's a place that I love. It's a place where I have family, where I have many friends, and just it's in my heart. From Puerto Rico, I moved to Washington, D.C. for a year. Then I moved to Chicago for 5 years, and then I came to Connecticut. So that's a little bit of the layers in my identity that have shaped me and, you know, and have helped to make me who I am and giving me a sense of different spaces and different realities. When I came to Connecticut, people will always ask me, Estela, where are you from? And I knew they were not interested in this story. They were just being polite. They listened to my accent and they wanted to have more information. So I decided, you know what, I'm going to be facetious. So when they asked me, Estela, where are you from? I said to them, as you can tell from my accent, I come from Chicago. The funny part is that nobody that I said that answer, nobody asked me the follow-up question, but that's not a Chicago accent. No one. I think they were so outstanding. They were so in shock that they didn't dare to pursue it. But that's a little bit of who I am. I have embraced all those layers. I think they're part of my DNA now. And I think that's part of being Latinx in this country. I accept the complexity that we're not one dimension, that we're multiple dimensions. But I know Professor Casiano understands identities better than I do. So I'm going to ask him to sort of talk about that topic with all of you, so then we can continue our conversation. So Noel, go ahead, please.
Gracias, Stella. And again, for me, it's a privilege and an honor to be with all of you, and for Lisa to invite me to be part of this awesome conversation. And just, you know, and I applaud the university for understanding the importance of identity and being visible, right, on campus. And today, I just want to make sure that hopefully by the time when we're done, that we can have a better understanding of not just celebrating our identity, but also being a little bit more visible on campus and being able to share who we are with everyone that we come across with on campus. Let it be a roommate that you are meeting for the first time, peers that you may have in your classroom, professors that you're meeting with for the first time. I think it's always important to share who we are and that to recognize that we all have a story, right? And there is so much value and richness in that story. So I thank Estela for letting everybody know that she's from Chicago, right? So who am I, right? Because I'm fairly new to the university as well. My name is Dr. Noel Casiano, and I'm a assistant professor of psychology and human services here in Hilliard College at the University of Hartford. And I don't know if you can tell where I come from, right? I am very, very proud to be Puerto Rican. But to tell you a little bit, like Estela said, who am I, right? What's my identity? So I always have to say that I was born and raised in Hartford, right? Never lived anywhere else, pretty much in Hartford my whole entire life. But my maternal side of the family comes from Aguada, Puerto Rico. And right now, well, Aguada, Puerto Rico still has its challenges, even 17 days after Hurricane Fiona. Family members still are without power in that side of Puerto Rico where my mother's family's from. And then my father's family's from Ponce, Puerto Rico, which is on the southern part of Puerto Rico. And maybe some of you are aware of Ponce, Puerto Rico. A lot of people from Ponce say that that's the real capital of Puerto Rico. Right. But the real capital is San Juan. But just yesterday, President Biden was in Ponce to be able to come and kind of recognize the struggles that we're still having on the island, not just with power, with the electrical grid, but to also understand better understand the needs of the island. So there it is. So my maternal side is from Aguada, Puerto Rico. My paternal side is from Ponce, Puerto Rico, and I'm born and raised in Hartford, Connecticut, particularly on Park Street, right? So that's pretty much who I am. And everywhere I go, I am very, very kind of proud to just kind of highlight who I'm from, hopefully share my story as much as I can, because I think it's important that we get to celebrate who we are and where we come from. I think, we have to break away from the things that divide us and just recognize that, yeah, we may speak different languages, we may eat different types of food. Like I love my arroz con gandules and pernil, but that doesn't mean that we can't learn from one another and to be able to share our identity with one another. So with that being said, I think Estela wanted me to talk a little bit about what is identity, right? And when I think about identity, I think about identity development in this way. So I want you to think about some key aspects to consider. Early school of psychology, there was this thing called the blank slate theory. The blank slate theory said that we were all born a blank slate, and that identity begins to develop, or our personality, our characteristics, and who we are begins to develop after that. And now, because of all the advances in neuroscience, we know that there is this interuterine kind of developmental process that's happening. And I think that when we look at early attachment and bonding, it doesn't start at birth. It really starts in this kind of interuterine developmental process where in the womb, a baby's already starting to understand the type of world that they're coming into based on those early bonding experiences and understanding, if you really think about it, understanding the messages that that baby is receiving already in the womb as their brain is developing. They already know what type of world they're going to enter, if it's a loving world or if it's a world that is stressful. You know, all those messages are being sent not only by the mom, but also by how the mom feels in relationship with people that are around her. So identity development really starts there, right? Really starts in that kind of intrauterine developmental process. And then when we start to look at, okay, now you're born, and what types of early attachment experiences and bonding, hopefully you have positive attachment and bonding experiences. And then we start to see the parental values that now, as your parents or guardians are teaching you as you develop into your toddlerhood, childhood, and even adolescent stages in life. Those are really key factors, well, as far as when you think about identity development. Then it comes, you know, along the way, those cultural identity experiences. So growing up, I remember as a kid, as a young child, you know, spending holidays with my family, being able to celebrate Christmas and Thanksgiving and birthdays and, you know, the Puerto Rican parade, you know, all those things that we would share together. Those cultural identity experiences are really also another important layer of identity development, because there you start to see how you see your family kind of celebrate those cultural kind of aspects of who you are. Language is also important, how language is used, and not only to be able to communicate with family members, but to be able to have that connection of, I speak Spanish, yo hablo español, that's because yo vengo de la isla de Puerto Rico, right? So it kind of connects you to your roots and where you come from. And then you think about music. Music is so rich. Music is so rich. There are so many things that through music, not only you can identify where you come from, but also what are the messages through music that highlight the beauty of your culture. What does it mean to fall in love? What does it mean to have a family? What does it mean to celebrate where you come from? Those messages through music are also a form of cultural identity. And then food. I think that it wouldn't be a party unless there's food, and we're participating of some of those you know, ethnic foods that we eat, and that we are kind of staples that are supposed to be in every single celebration or family gathering. So yes, we have our apple pie because we are Americans, but at the same time, we also have our arroz con gandules, our pasteles, and those things that kind of highlight that the foods that we are used to eating based on where we come from. And then there's aspects of religion. When you think about religious, the religious part of cultural identity, there may be times where as a family, you're going to church on Sunday, or when someone is getting married, and when someone is having a quinceañera, or when, unfortunately, when we lose family members, you know, there are some religious aspects of celebration that are part of our cultural identity as well. And then you start to see the community and peer relational experiences. So like I highlighted, I'm from, you know, I was born and raised in Hartford, but primarily raised in the area, or what we call Frog Hollow, or the Park Street neighborhood in Hartford. So my community is really kind of essential to my development as well as identity. I have many mentors like Jorge Rivera and some other mentors from my community that also brings that level of attachment and experience that I've had based on the community that I come from and the peers that I share that with. You know, my peers growing up in a specific neighborhood on Park Street and Cedar Street, or Park Street and Morton Street, and then sharing some of those educational experiences as well, because when I was kind of growing up, we went to our local neighborhood schools. I know now things are a little bit different, and there are ways that you can go to your local community school, or kind of through a lottery and go and attend other types of schools as well. But that community peer academic experience, you start to have like these secondary family members. I remember I grew up with specific peers, and because we lived in the same neighborhood, we went to the same schools, they were almost like second cousins, right? So, and we refer to them like, oh yeah, ese es mi primo, esa es mi prima, even though there's no blood relation, but the community and peer relationship kind of binds us in that way. And then, there are those late adolescent and early adult kind of identity reassessment periods where we get to remember, okay, now that I'm an adolescent, or I'm in college, right? For those that are now in college and looking forward to a specific career, or preparing yourself for a specific career. I remember that when I was an undergraduate student, that's when I really began to understand the importance of my identity and my culture by writing papers about who I was and where I come from, and including that information of identity in everything that I did, not only in the clubs that I joined on campus, but also part of my academic experience, sharing that. So all that to say, Estela, right, that identity development is also a lifelong process. Because even now as a father, I teach my son the importance of identity and who he is and where he comes from, where his parents come from, where his grandparents come from. So identity development is a lifelong process, and it never really ends.
Yeah,
so
I agree.
I wanted to share all of that.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. I totally agree. And that has been my experience. My experience is that it took me a while to sort of come to terms with the fact that I couldn't just be from one place, that I had to acknowledge all those layers, all those places where I live. And also, there are gender issues, there are other kinds of things. I'm going to now sort of try to address the issue of invisibility for Latinos, because again, we're multi-layered, but we're also invisible. And that also has been for me a long life process. I'm tall, I'm 5'8", yet in many instances, when I go to meetings, when I'm present, I know I'm totally invisible. Let me start with the accent piece. I was a provost at a university in Chicago, and they invited the Cardinal of Chicago to come to campus and talk. And he talked about bilingualism. And the way he explained it was that, of course, bilingual means two, which we know comes from Latin, and lingua means tongue. But in Latin, he added, which is something that I didn't know, that lingual, tongue, really meant brains. And the fact was that when you said somebody was bilingual, it meant that person had two brains. It was the first time in my life that I had heard the notion that being bilingual was really having two brains, knowing more, not knowing less. We know that bilingual in this country is really perceived as remedial. You don't know English, not that you know two languages, but you don't know English, which is not true. You know two languages. In other places, it is accepted. The other issue is that really Latin accents or Latinx accents are not sophisticated. They are not the accent to have. If you have a European accent, that's much more, involved, much more acceptable. So I had to come to terms, and it really made me cry to hear this person talk about being bilingual as, really having two brains. So I now use that often when I talk to my Latino friends, colleagues, students, and so on and so forth. The invisibilities, I know I'm invisible because of my accent, because of who I am, and so on and so forth. I was teaching in a seminar for many years for women who wanted to be administrators. And what I used to do would go the night before to be at the dinner with these women to get to know them as students in my class. I would sit down with them, introduce myself, and they usually did not pay attention to me. They would ask me, what is it that you do? As well, I'm going to be teaching you tomorrow. They tended to ignore me. The point was, though, that the next day, I was very good at teaching them. And suddenly I became visible. Suddenly I became visible. So the next day, everybody wanted to have lunch with me. But that's the way. So I'm used to that happening to me. I don't get angry anymore. But what I've had to do, and Noel, you sort of address it, is first acknowledge who I am. I then, accept my identity as a complexity of layers and experiences and things. Embrace that. Second, understand that I'm not part of the majority in this country. Therefore, I'm going to be in the margins. And if I have to be visible and so on, it would take some effort from my part. It would take for me to connect to different groups that are part of my different layers of identity as a Latina, as a woman, as an administrator, as whatever else I may be, and then try to know as much as I can, have data, have information, and participate, and to then understand that if I'm not seen, I will be able to, or I need to act to make myself visible depending on, on the situation and on strategy. I don't get angry anymore. I sort of say to myself, wait till they get to know me and see me. And that gives me a lot of pleasure. But that's the reality. Again, tall, I'm not skinny, so I'm very, visually on your face. But, the fact remains that the first impression, the first reaction is to put me in the margins, not to accept me as mainstream. And I think for students is more difficult because they're younger. They haven't perhaps come to terms with those different layers of their identity. They may have identities that are different in terms of gender choices and so on. And that complicates perception of the half of them. And therefore they have to work with more intentionality and identify allies who would help them to make themselves visible. So I know you probably have a lot of strategies that we can discuss, Noel.
Well, I like to touch upon that aspect where you just mentioned, because I struggle with that earlier on in my years as well, where I used to get upset by being invisible.
Yes.
And I used to say, it is not fair that I have to work double to be able to be recognized by everyone else, by society, by academia, by the place of employment where I'm from, that I constantly had to work as hard or double as hard as my peers just to be recognized for some of the talents and competence and abilities that I had. And that used to get me really upset, and I used to get frustrated with that. And then I learned to understand that in that process, right, in the process of me working double as hard as my peers, that only prepared me to be able to excel in certain, places and levels. And so then I try to, understand that, yes, being invisible, it is not uncomfortable, right? We all have competencies, we all have abilities. And in working hard to become visible, yeah, there are challenges in that. And it's unfortunate that we have to do that. But along the way in that journey, I am being prepared as, to be the very best that I can be at whatever I am doing. Let it be a student in history class, let it be a student in biology class, let it be a professional, at the place where I work. So it allowed me that opportunity to just understand that, yeah, we constantly have to work hard. And that's part of our culture anyways. We come from a culture of hardworking people, right? We don't give up easily. I think you saw in the during the COVID-19 pandemic, the people that were on the front lines were people from our communities, right? Working those jobs that maybe required for us to be working and not really having the ability to do other things or work from home because we had certain types of jobs. So we come from hardworking people. I come from a family that says, whatever you do, you have to work hard in order to be successful. So that's already ingrained in who I am. It's part of my DNA. So then I started to say, well, let me celebrate that. The fact that I come from a culture that says you have to work hard, and it is good to work hard. It's good to be excellent and to be able to do the things that you need to do with a high bar instead of just kind of riding by or just being average, right? Because I remember growing up, sometimes, I got stuck in a season as a high school student where I was just marginally getting by. And I understood that wasn't going to be good enough if I wanted to be successful in life. So yes, I come from a hardworking kind of mentality that was ingrained in me. And to become visible, we have to work hard, right? But at the same time, we also have to understand, like you said, you mentioned a very important aspect of this becoming visible is finding allies, right? And allies are not, allies are people, right? Any person that either stands actively with you to promote and advance the culture of where you come from and to include you in spaces or include you in environments that probably you wouldn't be invited or you would probably be excluded from. So an ally does that. So I think having allies is important, but that doesn't take away from my perspective, and that's just my opinion, of you working hard as well for yourself to have all the advances that you want to achieve so you can meet your academic goals, your professional goals, your career goals. That's up to you, right? My mom always said, education was the key, and I understood that, and I had to work really hard. But she says, no one is going to come and rescue you. You have to do that for yourself. You have to do that work for yourself. Now, if we can be part of a community that allows us to gain entry into certain places that normally we wouldn't have because based of our, where we come from and our skin and our accent and our language. So it's good to have those allies, but at the same time, to continue to work hard.
Yeah. I'm in total agreement, Noel. I think, again, it starts with one. And I have worked very hard all my life and continue to do that, to be prepared, to have the data, to have the knowledge. And, in preparation for our conversation today, we were talking to Lisa that a lot of people, for example, don't know that the Spaniards were here in this country before the Pilgrims. And, the example that I gave Lisa, and Lisa said, oh my God, that's interesting, is if you look at the Western states, if you look at Nevada, it's called Nevada and not snowy because the Spaniards were there. If you look at Colorado, it's called Colorado and not reddish because the Spaniards were there. I was reading about a friend who said his mother never moved, but she used to be Mexican and now she's in the United States because the frontier moved because this country took over land that belonged to Mexico. So the presence of the Spaniards, of the Latinos in this country has been here for many, many years, even before the Pilgrims. People don't know that. I went once to Georgia to make a presentation and doing my background review and learning that the famous Georgia peach was introduced by the Spaniards in Georgia. Nobody knows that. So part of what we have to do is know our history, understand who we are, accept, again, the complexities that we have. That when I went to live in Chicago, they invited me to a Mexican restaurant thinking that my food was Mexican. I said, no, I eat rice and beans, but cook the Puerto Rican way, not with the the ajís and all those chiles that Mexicans, to me, Mexican food is like Chinese food, it's foreign food. Now I love it, I miss it, I appreciate it, but I had to learn because it wasn't exactly the same. So I think that you're right about invisibility. And the allies, the way I got allies was really by belonging or by working with groups that were part of the multiple identities that I have, professional identities. I was a provost, so I went to conferences with academic affairs people. I was a Latina woman, so I went to conferences for Latina women or for women in terms of higher education, and so on. And I went with groups of Latinos to another conferences to talk about our issues and our goals and so on and so forth. So I found supporting all those groups, and that doesn't mean that they were perfect groups. Latinos, we can be feisty, we can sort of be very opinionated, but the fact that we could use Spanish when we were talking once in a while, that we could do code switching, the fact that we all, again, have strong traditions of family, of resiliency, as you said, because we're immigrants and we came here seeking better opportunities. The fact that we value our community. And like you said, our family is not only our parents, our brothers and sisters, our family is los primos, madrina, padrino, it's really the extended family that comes together to be there for us. So I found my support system and my allies that way, and also working with colleagues and so on. But I think I totally agree the importance of being prepared, working hard, and knowing the history, knowing and understanding who we are and what we are and why we're here in this country. And that, I think, is not necessarily common information for people. Even the notion of language. Since my coming to terms with being bilingual as a way of knowing more, I read studies that say that if you're bilingual, and this was done in Canada and in India also, as you age, if you're going to get Alzheimer, being bilingual delays Alzheimer, because when you're really switching from one language to the other is like doing gymnastic, brain gymnastic. It goes from one side of the brain to the other. And so if you forget one word, maybe it will come out in the other language. So I use that now as, to my, with the Anglos, with my fellow colleagues who are older. I say, if you want to prevent Alzheimer, don't do crossword puzzles. Study another language, become bilingual, and that will help you more than anything else. So I think that, to me, that's part of what I have learned. And as you say very wisely, it's a lifelong process. It's not something that I could have done in my 20s. It took me a while. It's taken me a while to sort of accept the beauty of this identity that I have, and appreciate it each day more and more, and be proud of it, and so on. And also the fact that we belong here in this nation. We belong here. As you are aware, there's a joke that circulated after the hurricane in Puerto Rico, where the electricity went out, and people were suffering so much because they many towns did not have electricity. And the joke said, which Puerto Rican towns have electricity? And they said, Miami, Philadelphia, Orlando, Bronx. The fact is that Puerto Ricans are in all those towns, and those towns are also part of the island. Many people don't know that Puerto Ricans are United States citizens, that you don't need a passport to travel there, and that Puerto Ricans have been present in every war, that they have served this country in multiple ways. So again, it's our responsibility to teach, to share, and to educate other people about our culture, who we are, and what we bring.
Yeah, so two things that I want to also kind of follow up on what you said brilliantly. One is this whole concept of being bilingual. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of research out there, and I think Lisa's going to pin an article that I put on there, and there's multiple sources in there that highlights the importance of being bilingual. And when you think about being bilingual or teaching children multiple languages earlier in life, it promotes this sense of social and cognitive development that is going to allow them to now use that being bilingual in a social way that makes them to be able to have more kind of peer relationships and social abilities, because they know multiple languages and they can connect with a larger kind of peer network. But from this notion of cognitive development, it's right on, right? The ability for our brain to code switch and to be able to manage multiple languages, let it be Spanish and English or Portuguese and English, or, whatever language, if you can really learn another language and be able to kind of allow that to be part of your identity and who you are, and practice it. Yeah, there's many cognitive benefits to it, as well as we not only for get ready for academic enrichment opportunities in career, but also just in a social kind of environment. And also, like you pointed out, the ability for our brain to remain connected and not disconnect as we get older. But that part of being bilingual is important. And then I think what you said about, I also wanted to kind of talk about the importance of family, right? I was born in Hartford, Connecticut, but I have family in Puerto Rico, right? So that essence of connection of family and where you come from is so part of who we are as a Latino community, and to understand the importance of family, so how even intergenerational kind of aspects of family are important. I grew up without my father, right? So my grandfather was so instrumental, and he was like my father figure in my life, right? And I lost him 3 years ago, and it was probably the hardest thing that I had to go through, because he meant that much to me, because he filled in a gap or a void that I had growing up without my father. But family is so important, and family is just not the people that reside in your household.
Right.
For us Latinos, right? Family is, like you said, our cousins. And yeah, there are 3 million people in Puerto Rico, but there are over 7.5 million people that live here in the United States. So, and that's just Puerto Ricans, right? You start to think about, our Mexican brothers and sisters and everyone else. You start to see that, the Latino community in this country is an upcoming, and right, we keep reading all these reports and data and stats that by 2050 we're gonna be one of the majorities here in this country, and it's important to not only recognize that, but on our way there to be able to highlight the many kind of benefits and richness of our community that this country can benefit from, and not to look at us and marginalize us when we think about this aspect of visibility.
I totally agree. I also want to, perhaps talk a little bit about code switching, because people don't know what it is. And it is the notion that you're using one language and suddenly you switch to the other one. It used to be seen, and that's part of the ignorance that happens with languages, as a person who didn't know well either language. That's not it. What they know now, and it happens to me, is that language is connected to different aspects of your life. For example, I always pray in Spanish. I talk to babies in Spanish, and I curse in Spanish in spite of the fact that I lived so many years in the United States. When I went back to live in Puerto Rico, I'm driving and suddenly I'm cursing in Spanish, and these people are wanting to fight with me because of what I said. I said, oh my God, Estela, you better stop yourself. But code switching it's good. Again, it helps you that gymnastic. And then my professional language is English. I did a presentation in Puerto Rico one time, and I had trouble translating some of the concepts that are so easy for me in English. So language is connected to different aspects of your life. That's why, when you're sick and you go to a hospital, it's so helpful to have somebody who says words for you if you're Spanish speaking in Spanish, because it really is connected to that side of your brain that has to do with feeling. So that's one thing. And also the notion of bilingualism that I mentioned in this country, bilingualism is seen as remedial education is bilingualism. Yet parents that are knowledgeable, that are educated, they send their children to what is called dual language. So dual language is the same thing as bilingual. The child is learning two languages because, as you mentioned, Noel, there's evidence that shows that children that learn two languages do better. They're smarter. They're using their brain to greater capacity. But dual language is acceptable. Dual language happens in Europe, where, in most countries, people speak 2 and 3 languages. Like a monolingualism is a phenomenon of the United States. And that's part, again, of the issue of why we're not visible, because it's one approach, one culture, one way of doing things, and not necessarily knowing another language as the asset that it should be and needs to be. So again, that's part of our role in educating people and educating a population. It is a job that never ends, I think. It's a job that we have to continue. And as you said also, no matter where you are in your life, to continue to develop your identity so you can embrace it proudly and offer help and become an ally to others that may be beginning to sort of seek ways of expressing themselves and seeing themselves.
Yeah, awesome. So I know we're almost running out of time and we want to take some questions if we can. So before we do that, Stella, I wanted for us to quickly touch upon, how can we help, Hispanics and Latinos, Latinx people feel visible in our classrooms, in our office spaces. We might have some people here from the community and from different organizations, but to be able to help students in the classroom feel a little bit more visible in our work environment, in our community spaces. One of the ways that I do that in all my classes, I think if there are any students in the audience or watching online and you've taken a class with me, that part of our introduction, I always ask, who are you, where are you from? And not just like what town or city or state you're from, but where are you from? And it's really important that I like to highlight that right in my classroom so that all the students get to appreciate the richness that's sitting right in their classrooms with them. So when a student says, yes, I am Italian, I am from Nigeria, I am Puerto Rican, I am from the Dominican Republic, we start to see, again, we think of this kind of as a global society, but to hopefully kind of simulate that in our classrooms and have kind of this global academic experience at the university, within our classroom, and in all the spaces that we share here. I think it's important for us to draw out. So I know, as a provost, how did you kind of help promote, visibility for Latino people and professionals in those spaces and in academic spaces as well?
Yeah. I think, it happened in Chicago. The fact that the students saw me, and when I first arrived at the university, the students, Latinx students, gave a reception. And I realized that the reception wasn't for me. It was really because they saw the opportunity of someday becoming or having the position that I had. It was very, very moving and very significant when I realized that it was their hope. Yes. Was what they were celebrating, their hope of becoming administrators. So part of what I did, there are different things. One of the things is really acknowledging names. And like you said, names of everybody. That's difficult, but that puts you in a position of how does the student feel when they have to say the names of others when it's not their language. So acknowledging names in the right way, in the appropriate way. They used to do nicknames for Latinos before, if you were Jose, oh no, now you're Joe. And really, eliminating your identity by doing that. So I also make sure that we hired faculty that were diverse, that reflected the student population. My institution was a Hispanic serving institution, which meant that we had more than 25% Latinos. So we wanted to hire professors that reflected the student body. And then supporting the faculty, junior faculty, making sure that they had the support to succeed, supporting the student organizations and meeting with them. I had the president of the student union was a Haitian student from Haiti. And he's a Facebook friend now. He now is a professor, and he still addresses me as Provost Lopez, which I love. But really, making sure that my door was always open for students to come and listening to them. And so it's doing big things, but also doing small things of respect, things of acknowledgement, things of being present, things of listening. And when there were complaints, making sure that I was aware of what they were saying and why they were doing that. So we were very successful in trying to become more student-centered when I was there in Chicago for those 5 years. And to be honest with you, I've done other work. I made more money in other positions as an administrator, but that was the job that I liked the best, because I was on campus seeing the students every day and trying to model for them what they were seeking, which was the opportunity to be successful in whatever career they chose. So it was very rewarding, very rewarding. So I think, thank you for asking that question. And I think we all have that responsibility to make sure that whatever opportunities we've had, we ensure that we can make those happen for other students, for everybody else.
Yeah, and to be able to, there are certain academic things that we have to, teach and disciplines that we're teaching, but also understanding and acknowledging the different cultural perspectives and the nuances of how things are done in different countries, and for us to talk about that in the classroom as well, in the spaces in the university, just last week, I was talking about the importance of listening skills, and I'm going through what are listening skills, and I'm understanding that, there are different kind of key aspects of what listening skills comprise of, but then understanding that not every culture is going to give you eye-to-eye contact. Not every culture is okay with hugs. I come from a very huggy, kissy culture.
Exactly.
But I know that not every culture does that. So to be able to understand and even from those perspectives, the things that we're learning, how we apply those things from a culturally informed perspective, that makes a big difference.
Absolutely. I think what we're seeking, Noel, I have a quote from a book that I love, and I'm going to show it for a moment, called A Harvest of the Empire. I don't know. Oh, the camera doesn't show it well. It doesn't
blurring it out.
That it talks about that what we're seeking, is really the opportunity to achieve equity and inclusion in this country. We're not seeking anything else. We're not seeking to remove anybody, to push aside anybody. It's a search for survival, for inclusion on an equal basis, nothing more. It is a search grounded in the belief that 500 years after the experiment began, we're all Americans of the New World, and our most dangerous enemies are not each other, but the great wall of ignorance between us.
Oh, that's great.
So I think that's our responsibility also, to educate others and to bring others along the way, so they are part of what we all do, and ensure that nobody's on the margins, that everybody's visible.
Yeah, and just recognizing, so going back, with the visibility and ally perspective, what are some ways that you think that allies can be part of? We're celebrating Hispanic Heritage Month, and that's great. But how can throughout the rest of the year and in every different space, how can allies really be helpful in understanding, how us as a Latino community can be part of, great successes in many different areas. So what are your thoughts about, allies in that
I think allies can be sort of a translator or a guide sometimes, because we are, because of our values, we may not see the opportunity, we may not see, or they may not listen to us when we say it. So a guide can be that guide or that translator that bridges the two cultures or the two ways of thinking or approaching things. I don't know, one can say my best friend can be an ally. It depends. It depends on, in what you're doing and what you are doing. But it's really having somebody that shares your values and sees the strategies that need to be put in place so we can accomplish what we're trying to do. I think, again, I always knew that sometimes I couldn't push for things. And also it's part of the political aspects of being an administrator. But if I had somebody else say it, if I had somebody else embrace it, if I had somebody else voice it, it was easier for me then to make it happen. So I use that strategically very, very often in terms of what I wanted to accomplish. And allies are critical in the work that we do. Again, you need, somebody told me early on in my career as an administrator, you need 3 people in a meeting to push something. The fact that you are very passionate and very loud doesn't make it happen. You need 2 other people in the same room to ensure that you're heard. And that's where allies come from. If you want to add a strategy or add an item in the agenda. So that's a way of working that is very, very important, I think.
Yeah, and I have a really good friend, Dr. Meza Akbar, who wrote a book called Beyond Ally, The Pursuit of Racial Justice. And I wrote chapter 4 in that book for Dr. Akbar, because they are, this is where I wanted to kind of ask you about these unconscious kind of implicit biases that we as a community sometimes have to deal with. And, it happens a lot, personally. I remember I was invited to go speak at the Project Aware conference in Washington, D.C. And there you have, the top kind of leaders in psychology, mental health, right, substance abuse, all of that in one building in Washington, D.C. And there was about 1,000 people there. So I had these 2 breakout sessions that I was doing, but then I was doing one of the keynote sessions during the conference. So then I remember at the end of the keynote session, right, people come up to you and they say really nice things, and they, tell you how much they enjoyed your conversation, your keynote address. But, I remember there's one particular lady, and I'm not judging. I'm pretty sure she came from a good space or well-meaning, but she was like, oh my God, I really enjoyed, your keynote. You're so well-spoken for being a Puerto Rican, right?
Oh my gosh.
And I said, well, thank you. But, I believe that, English is my first language. So, I'm glad, but I also speak Spanish as well. But again, some of these implicit biases that sometimes we have to deal with, and again, it could be well-meaning. Sometimes they're not. But, as a community, how do you deal with these kind of unconscious, because they're not probably right there. They're not aware that they're saying certain things that are probably not helpful or not, compassionate or anything like that. But they're being said, they're being done. How can we help spread a better message of how can you eliminate some of these implicit biases from communities that really probably don't understand our community or are trying to get to know our community?
I think, it goes back to the identity issue. I know who I am. So whenever somebody criticizes whatever I'm saying, I know they're not criticizing Estela. They're criticizing whatever projection, whatever role I'm in that moment and so on. So you have to have thick skin. You also have to remember that above all, you are educating. You know, part of the challenge that we all have because of the ignorance, because of the lack of knowledge, is that we need to educate. That requires, again, thick skin. That requires that we don't get necessarily the emotional reaction when those things happen, that we stay rational and sort of address it as, my gosh, this person is ignorant and my role is to educate it. That's hard. That's hard because sometimes it's insulting and disrespectful, but ultimately it's much more effective than to get angry at everything. And you know, I do sometimes get angry at everything, but then I give myself permission to do that, and I go and like you, I like food, so I go and eat a good arroz con gandule, and you know, that keeps me happy.
Yes.
But I think those are the things that, you know, again, as you become more mature in your knowledge of who you are and what you are, it's easier to do and to address that ignorance that comes from people. You know, my daughter, one of my daughters is married to a German, and when we go out sometimes, you know, and between he has a German accent, I have a Spanish accent, they prefer to talk to him because he's German, and the German accent is more acceptable than my Spanish accent. So I understand that, you know, and I sort of laugh at it. But again, there are multiple examples, and you're absolutely right. We will continue to deal with those things, and we will continue to use education and our commitment to our community and to our people to say, you know what, we're part of this country, and what we want is to be treated fairly with equity, and we want to be included. So
yeah, great. So I don't know if there's any other kind of final comments, or we want to move to questions and anything that maybe Lisa has on her end.
Lisa, we're sort of waiting for you.
I know, I was struggling with the technology. My apologies.
That's okay.
I was like, isn't that how things always go on Zoom?
Always.
Always. So we do have a question. And sorry, I'm looking at two different laptop screens. So just a reminder for our attendees, if folks have questions and you're on Zoom, you can use the Q&A function on the Zoom toolbar to submit those. There's an image on the screen to show you exactly where to find that. And in the meantime, you two touched a lot upon representation, and especially with both of you having doctorates and being in higher education. Can you talk to us a little bit about what that representation in higher education could and should look like, not just for students, but for faculty, for staff? What could that look like?
You know, I walk into any room to this date, and I look around and I try to identify how many people look like me, how many women there are, how many people of color there are, how many Latinx are. So I still look for that. One of my best meetings was, I was in Miami, Florida, in a community college meeting, and everybody spoke like I do. A friend of mine from Puerto Rico used to say that we speak tropical English. Everybody had an accent. I said, oh my God, this is my place in life. So I think representation, to me, it's such a key factor. Again, I serve in several boards. Who looks like me? Who speaks like me? Who's there? And I'm very much aware that my role is not only I cannot be the model for everybody, but to make sure that whatever I do represents as much as possible the knowledge, commitment, and love for our community that I have.
Yeah, and I think, I've had similar experiences, where I walk into a room and I'm looking around to see who else speaks Spanish, who else looks like me. Um, and sometimes it's sad that there's not enough of us, right? So one of my kind of personal things that I like to do is like to encourage students to be able to say, hey, you could reach, you could obtain, you could, accomplish, not just a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, a doctorate degree, and be able to be a leader in a particular field of research, of academia, whatever it may be, and encourage them. And I think that, by doing that, it's kind of my personal way of promoting so that students, Latino students or students in general, sometimes I, look at my Black, Indigenous, and, kind
Right.
of people of color as well, students, no matter where they come from, to be able to kind of understand that, hey, I was in that seat and I remember, maybe not seeing a professor that looked like me, that spoke like me, that came from somewhere similar that I came from. But here I am, it's doable, you can do it as well. And just kind of, have that in the room and having conversations with it as well. I've had conversations with my students and, and I say, hey, how many of you, if you've been in my class, you've probably experienced this, how many of you want to get your doctorate degree in psychology as well? And just kind of like encouraging students to pursue that and to fill the room with more students of color and Latino students as well.
Great. Thank you both so much. And then I think for our final question of the afternoon, you've both provided us with at least one resource each. But if there are concrete steps that you would recommend that folks could take to either increase their own visibility or be better allies or better support the Latinx community on our campus, could you please share those with us now?
I think we have said it throughout this dialogue, this wonderful dialogue, and I'm very grateful for Professor Casiano to have engaged with me in this conversation. Is really knowing yourself, knowing who you are, what are your values, and then seeking people. I always sought people that thought differently from me, but that share the same values. To me, the values is the critical aspect. Not so much what they look like or what their feel is. I like people who question me and challenge me, but I knew their values were similar. To me, that's a critical aspect. Be knowledgeable, like Professor Casiano mentioned. You have to know who we are, where do we come from, what are we, what have we offered to this country, how have we enhance the opportunities that exist in this nation. Our contributions, they are hidden, like we are invisible, they're also invisible. So part of our role is really to make them visible to others and share that with others. So, and that's, I think, what happens through Hispanic Heritage Month. So it's not easy, it's not necessarily easy, but it's so rewarding and so wonderful. Every time a life is touched because we do that, we are changing people and giving them opportunities for the future.
Yeah, and I think that getting involved. I think getting involved is so important. So if you're a student on campus, getting involved, not just in the particular club, the Latin club, Latino club on campus, but getting involved in other things and allowing yourself to be exposed to different areas that maybe it's out of your comfort zone, right? I think when we feel uncomfortable, there's opportunity for growth. And not only for us, but also for people that we're engaging with. So, not just isolating in your dorm and, feeling uncomfortable. Well, I don't know people, or, I don't feel comfortable in this space or that space, but, trying to get involved on campus in different clubs, organizations, and talking with other students and kind of, allowing yourself to be seen on campus and allowing opportunities for you to talk about who you are, where you come from, and some of the things that make you who you are, part of your identity. I think that's a key factor as well. And I remember, and I'm glad that, I think on campus, some of the visiting restrictions are coming off because, inviting or bringing your family on campus, right? Not just on moving day where they're helping you move in and then they never come back, but having opportunities for your family to be on campus, for your siblings to see a college environment, for you to invite some friends that maybe didn't think college was an opportunity for them, or they weren't thinking about it. And now they're on campus and now they're kind of seeing it for themselves. Because I remember the first time I stepped foot on campus, it wasn't until my junior year, and it was because I was doing a college tour. And I think that if I would have had, experiences earlier on, younger, I think that, things would have been much different. So to be able to provide not just the visibility for yourself on campus, but open visibility for your family to be here, for, staff, administration to have interactions with your family and get to know who your family is, and for your siblings to kind of be part of that process, and friends and your community, I think is a vital key to also being more visible, not just on campus, but also for your family members and your community as well.
Thank you so much for sharing those final pieces of advice for everybody, and for being here and having this wonderful conversation with us today. I truly could listen to you two talk all afternoon, and I would be so happy to do so, but I think people have to get to like class and meetings and stuff. So thank you again, Noel and Estela. The Office of Diversity, Equity, and Community Engagement, as well as the rest of the University of Hartford, truly appreciates everything that you have done to prepare for this conversation, and the fact that you took time and put in the emotional labor to join us today. So I'm going to take a moment and remove some spotlights. There we go. So real quick before everybody hops off of Zoom, I just want to say thank you to everybody who attended today. Thank you so much for joining us. We would love to get your feedback about today's program. As Estela and Noel mentioned a lot, we are working to increase invisibility for different populations on our campus. Over a lot of conversations with folks on campus, it has become clear that invisibility is really impacting folks' experience here. And we want everyone to feel visible and have a sense of belonging on our campus. So with that in mind, we would really appreciate feedback on this program and all of our programs. So you can scan the QR code using the camera app on your smartphone. I will also send out the link after this. And then just, some more shameless plugs about upcoming programs. So on Monday, we will have a land acknowledgement ceremony for Indigenous Peoples Day. It will be outside on the lawn outside GSU, 12:45 to 1:45. We will have local tribes present, and there will be tribal dancing, traditional drumming, and we will read our new UHeart land acknowledgement, which we are very excited to have now. And then on Tuesday, we have the annual Fall DEI lecture, which is sponsored by the Rogo Distinguished Visiting Lecturer Program. It's the experiences of Zora Neale Hurston, the complexities and intricacies of race, an examination by Lucy Ann Hurston. So that'll be Tuesday evening. And then, as I mentioned, we are working on increasing visibility and belonging. So part of that effort this year is we're doing a panel series. We are looking for people to attend as well as people to serve as panelists, engage in somewhat similar conversations, to talk through their experiences as different parts of different identity communities. And we'll be doing our fall 2022 community book read, Begin Again, James Baldwin's America and Its Urgent Lessons for Our Own. And Professor Bilal Sakou will be facilitating that for us. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us. And again, thank you to Estela and Noel for gracing us with this wonderful conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Happy Hispanic Heritage Month.
Happy Hispanic Heritage Month to you too.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.